Hi there. How are you tonight? I hope you're comfortable, maybe already in bed, with your head resting on your pillow as the gentle sound of rain patters outside your window. Close your eyes for a moment and take a deep breath. Let your mind wander with me, back through time, to a place so different from our modern world. Tonight, we're going to explore what would happen if you suddenly woke up in medieval England. So adjust your blanket, get comfortable, and let me transport you back through the centuries as the rain continues to fall. Imagine this. You fall asleep in your comfortable modern bed, but when your eyes open, everything has changed. The first thing you notice is the smell. Earthy, smoky, with hints of straw and something unfamiliar. The air feels different against your skin, heavier somehow, laden with moisture that seeps into your bones. The gentle sound of rainfall isn't coming through your window, but through gaps in a thatched roof above you. Tiny droplets occasionally find their way inside, creating a sporadic dripping sound that mingles with the more constant patter on the thatch. You're lying not on your comfortable mattress, but on a rough straw mattress placed directly on packed earth. The bed frame, if you could call it that, is a simple wooden platform raised slightly off the ground. There are no springs, no memory foam, just layers of straw covered with a coarse woolen blanket that scratches against your skin. Your pillow is a simple sack stuffed with more straw or perhaps dried herbs if you're fortunate. The smell of the herbs, lavender perhaps, or rosemary, mingles with the earthier scents around you. It's dim inside the small dwelling, much dimmer than you're accustomed to. There are no electric lights, of course, and windows are small. Tiny openings covered with oiled paper or thin animal hide rather than glass. They let in minimal light, but keep out the worst of the wind and rain. Right now, with the rain clouds blocking the sun, the interior is cast in deep shadow, broken only by the faint glow of embers in the central hearth. That hearth is the heart of this medieval home. Unlike modern houses with their hidden heating systems, here the fire is central, open, with smoke that's supposed to rise up and out through a hole in the roof. But on damp days like today, some of it lingers, creating a thin haze in the upper part of the room. The smoke has, over years, blackened the underside of the thatch and the rough-hewn wooden beams that support it. But the fire serves many purposes. It provides warmth, light, and it's where all cooking happens. Right now, it's merely glowing embers, waiting to be built up for the morning meal. The sound of rainfall intensifies for a moment, a brief downpour that makes you grateful to be inside, despite the unfamiliar surroundings. As medieval dwellings go, you might be fortunate to have woken up in a relatively decent one. Some peasant homes were little more than one-room huts with dirt floors, but yours appears to have at least some basic comforts. There's a wooden table and a couple of stools in one corner. Clay pots and wooden utensils hang from the walls or sit on crude shelves. A small wooden chest might contain clothing or other valuables, though valuables in medieval peasant terms would be quite modest indeed. The rain continues its gentle percussion on the thatch above. In medieval England, this sound would be deeply familiar to everyone. The climate during this period was actually cooler than our modern age, part of what historians call the Little Ice Age. Rain was common, especially in spring and autumn, and the constant moisture contributed to the challenges of daily life. Keeping dry was a constant struggle. Keeping warm perhaps an even greater one during the colder months. As you lie there, becoming more awake, you might wonder about the time. There are no clocks on the walls, no phones to check. In medieval England, time was marked differently. The average person would wake with the rising sun and sleep not long after sunset. The church bells might ring to mark certain hours of the day, but most people measured time by the position of the sun and the natural rhythms of daylight. On this rainy morning, With clouds obscuring the sun, it's harder to tell, but the faint gray light suggests early morning. You might hear sounds beginning outside, the soft murmuring of voices, the occasional bleat of sheep or goat, perhaps the distant crow of a rooster that's been announcing dawn for some time now. Medieval villages came to life early, with most people rising at first light to begin their day's labor. If you're in a larger dwelling that houses animals as well as people, not uncommon in medieval times, you might hear the shuffling and snorting of livestock in a partitioned area of the same building. The rain creates a kind of cocoon around the dwelling, dampening some sounds while amplifying others. The dripping from a leak in the corner seems louder now, a steady plink into a wooden bucket placed there for just this purpose. The smell of damp earth rises from the floor, mixing with the sense of smoke, straw, and unwashed bodies. Yes, that's another thing you'd notice. The concept of personal hygiene was quite different in medieval times. Not necessarily absent as some modern myths suggest, but certainly different, with full-body bathing being an occasional rather than daily activity. As you lie there taking in these new sensations, you might hear movement. Another person stirring under a similar rough blanket on another straw mattress. Medieval homes rarely afforded privacy. A typical peasant dwelling might house an entire family in one room, everyone sleeping in close proximity for warmth, and because space was a luxury. Parents, children, and sometimes extended family or even servants would share this single space for sleeping, eating, and all indoor activities. The person stirs again and sits up. Perhaps it's the woman of the household, ready to begin her day despite the rain. Her long hair is covered with a simple linen cap, her face lined with years of outdoor work. She doesn't speak to you yet. Perhaps she hasn't noticed you're awake, or perhaps she's focused on getting the fire properly lit before addressing anyone. She kneels by the hearth, adding small twigs and straw to the embers, blowing gently until small flames begin to catch. The fire grows, casting flickering light around the dim interior, creating dancing shadows on the walls. The walls themselves are made of wattle and daub, a lattice of wooden strips, the wattle, coated with a mixture of clay, straw, and animal dung, the daub. This material was inexpensive and relatively easy to work with, though it required regular maintenance. The rain would be a constant enemy of these walls, slowly eroding them over time if not properly maintained. Outside, the rain continues its steady fall, drumming a soothing rhythm on the thatch. Medieval roofs were remarkably effective at shedding water when well maintained, the densely packed straw or reeds creating a naturally water-resistant barrier. A good thatch could last decades with proper care, though it would need regular patching and eventually complete replacement. The thickness of the thatch, often a foot or more, also provided excellent insulation, keeping heat in during winter and the worst of the summer heat out. Now the woman is hanging a small iron pot over the fire, water for porridge, perhaps, or a thin gruel that would be a common breakfast. The medieval diet, especially for peasants, was centered around grains, barley, oats, rye, and sometimes wheat for those who could afford it. These would be made into bread, pottage, i.e., thick stew, or simple porridge. Breakfast, if eaten at all, would be minimal, perhaps a piece of bread or a small bowl of porridge before heading out to work. The sound of the rain intensifies again, and you hear a faint grumbling from the other side of the room. Another occupant, perhaps the man of the house, expressing displeasure at the weather. Rain meant difficulties for agricultural work, and in a society where most people were directly involved in food production, a rainy day could mean lost productivity and ultimately less food on the table. "Will it ever stop?" the man mutters, his voice rough with sleep and perhaps resignation. This wouldn't be the first rainy day to complicate his work, nor would it be the last. Medieval farmers were at the mercy of the weather in ways that modern people can barely comprehend. A too wet spring could rot seeds in the ground. A too dry summer could wither crops before harvest. Every aspect of the weather was noted, discussed, sometimes even recorded in simple terms. Its implications for survival always at the forefront of people's minds. The woman doesn't answer directly, just continues her work by the fire, now adding something to the pot, perhaps a handful of oats or barley. The grains would be grown in the surrounding fields and processed locally, often by hand using querns or at the local mill. Nothing came prepackaged. Everything required labor to produce, prepare, and cook. You sit up on your straw mattress, and now both of them notice you. There might be a moment of confusion. After all, you're not dressed like them. You might look different from what they're accustomed to. But hospitality was a valued virtue in medieval times, especially among common folk who understood the vulnerabilities of life. They might assume you're a traveler caught in bad weather, offered shelter for the night, and now unsure of your next move as the rain continues. Hungry? The woman might ask, gesturing to the pot now beginning to steam over the fire. Her speech might be difficult for you to understand at first. Medieval English was very different from our modern language. Middle English, spoken from roughly the 12th to the 15th century, would sound almost foreign to our ears, with different pronunciations, vocabulary, and grammar. If you found yourself in the earlier medieval period, Old English might be spoken, which would be completely unintelligible to a modern English speaker. But perhaps through gestures and the universal language of hospitality, you'd understand the offer of food. The rain provides a constant backdrop to these interactions, a gentle shushing sound as it falls on the thatch and the muddy ground outside. If you listen carefully, you might hear it running in small rivulets from the roof, perhaps collected in barrels beside the house. Water collection was important in medieval households, providing for drinking, cooking, and minimal cleaning needs. As the porridge cooks, filling the room with a simple, wholesome smell, you have time to take in more details of your surroundings. The floor beneath your feet as you stand is packed earth, perhaps strewn with rushes or straw to provide some insulation and absorb moisture and dirt. These would be changed periodically, though not as often as modern sensibilities might prefer. The old rushes, combined with spilled food, dirt brought in from outside, and other debris, contributed to the distinct smell of medieval dwellings. Earthy, organic, not necessarily unpleasant, but certainly unfamiliar to modern noses. The woman stirs the pot with a wooden spoon, one of the few utensils present. Wood was the material of choice for most everyday items, affordable, relatively easy to work with, and readily available. Pottery would be used for storage and cooking, but it was more costly. Metal items like the cooking pot were valuable possessions, often passed down through generations. In many peasant households, such metal cookware might be one of the most valuable items owned. Despite the simplicity, there's a certain comfortable rhythm to the scene. The rain, the fire, the preparation of food, these elements would be familiar and reassuring to medieval people, representing security and continuity in an often uncertain world. The sound of the rainfall softens momentarily, and through the small window, you catch a glimpse of gray daylight strengthening. Morning is properly arriving, and with it, decisions about how to navigate this new reality you've found yourself in. The man rises from his bed now, stretching as he stands to his full height, likely shorter than the average modern person, as medieval nutrition and health care resulted in generally smaller stature. He moves to the door, lifting the simple wooden latch to peer outside. A gust of damp, cool air enters the room, along with the stronger sound of rainfall. He surveys the sky, reading the weather as only someone whose life depends on it can. Might clear by midday, he offers, though his tone suggests he's not entirely convinced. Weather prediction was an essential skill in medieval times, based on observation, experience, and folk wisdom passed through generations. No weather apps or satellite imagery, just the sky, the wind, the behavior of animals, and perhaps persistent aches and old injuries that seem to forecast coming. Storms. The woman nods, continuing to stir the porridge that's now beginning to thicken. She might add a pinch of salt, a valuable commodity, or perhaps a handful of dried herbs for flavor. Medieval cooking made the most of limited ingredients, using herbs both for taste and for their believed medicinal properties. The concept of food as medicine was strong in this period, with certain herbs and foods prescribed for various ailments, according to the medical theories of the time. The rain creates a peaceful backdrop to these morning activities, a gentle patter that somehow makes the interior of the dwelling feel more secure, despite its simplicity. There's something primally comforting about being sheltered while hearing rainfall outside, a feeling that transcends time and connects you to these medieval people in a fundamental way. As the porridge finishes cooking, the woman removes the pot from above the fire and begins to ladle the simple meal into wooden bowls. There are no dining tables as we know them. You might eat sitting on stools around the fire, or perhaps at the small work table if the dwelling has one. Spoons would be used, but no forks. These wouldn't become common until much later. Much food would be eaten with hands or with bread as both food and utensil. The rain continues its gentle percussion, creating a soothing soundscape as you adjust to this medieval morning routine. So different from the alarm clocks, electric lights, and instant breakfasts of your modern life. Here, everything takes time, requires effort, follows the natural rhythms of daylight and season. Even on this rainy day when fieldwork might be limited, there would be plenty to do. Repairs around the dwelling, indoor crafts like spinning or weaving, care of any livestock, preparation of food for storage. As you sit with your bowl of simple porridge, feeling its warmth between your hands, you wonder what the rest of this medieval day will bring, with the sound of rainfall as your constant companion. The rain patters steadily on the thatch above, creating a soothing rhythmic background as you taste the porridge. It's bland by modern standards, perhaps a bit salty, with the earthy taste of barley or oats dominating. There might be a hint of herbs, but nothing like the variety of flavors you're accustomed to. No sugar, that would be an expensive luxury, reserved for the wealthy. Honey might sometimes be used to sweeten food, but it too would be used sparingly. This simple meal, however, would be sustaining, providing the calories needed for a day of physical labor. You can't help but notice how everything is connected to the immediate environment. The grains in your porridge were likely grown in fields visible from this very dwelling. The wooden bowl you're eating from was carved from local timber. The herbs might have been gathered from the surrounding countryside or grown in a small garden plot nearby. In medieval England, most of what people consumed or used was produced within a very small radius of where they lived. The concept of a global supply chain would have been utterly foreign. Other family members might be stirring now, perhaps children, rising from shared sleeping areas. Medieval families tended to be larger than modern ones, though infant and child mortality was tragically high. Children would be integrated into the household economy from a young age, with even small children assigned tasks appropriate to their abilities. There was little concept of childhood as a protected time of play and learning as we understand it today. The rainfall creates interesting shadows as the day brightens, the light filtering through the small windows casting dappled patterns on the earthen floor. These windows wouldn't have glass. That was far too expensive for common dwellings. Instead, they might be covered with oiled parchment to let in some light while keeping out the worst of the weather, or simply have wooden shutters that could be closed during storms or cold weather. On a mild rainy day like today, they might be partially open to allow both light and fresh air into the otherwise smoky interior. As everyone finishes their simple breakfast, the day's activities would need to be decided. Rain would alter the normal routine, particularly for agricultural work. Plowing, planting, or harvesting would be difficult or impossible in mud, but there were always indoor tasks that had perhaps been put off. During good weather, repairing tools, mending clothing, processing food for storage. Medieval life required constant labor just to maintain the basics of existence, with little room for idleness. Now you might notice another sound joining the rainfall, the distant tolling of church bells. The medieval day was often structured around the canonical hours, with church bells ringing to mark times for prayer throughout the day and night. The most important for ordinary people would be prime, early morning, sext, midday, vespers, evening, and compline, before bed. These bells provided a rough time structure in an age without clocks and connected communities to the religious rhythms that dominated medieval life. The man of the house listens to the bells, perhaps using them to finalize his plans for the day. "I'll check on the sheep," he might say. "Rain or no, they'll need tending." Livestock represented a significant investment and source of livelihood for many medieval households, providing wool, milk, meat, and other products essential for survival. Even on rainy days, animals required care, perhaps even more so to ensure they weren't suffering from the damp conditions. The woman nods, already planning her own tasks. "The bread needs baking," she might reply. Bread was a staple of the medieval diet, and baking was typically done every few days, producing dense, hearty loaves that would sustain the household. The process was labor-intensive, grinding grain, if not taken to the local mill, mixing dough, letting it rise, shaping loaves, and baking in the hearth or a communal oven. Each step required knowledge and skill passed down through generations. The rain continues its gentle patter as these morning decisions are made. Medieval people were accustomed to working with and around the weather. It was simply part of life's rhythm, rather than an inconvenience to be avoided. Their clothing reflected this reality, with layers of wool and linen designed to provide some protection from the elements. Not waterproof by modern standards, but wool in particular. Retained warmth even when damp, a critical quality in the cool, wet climate of medieval England. As the man prepares to venture outside, he might don a simple hooded cloak made of heavy wool. This practical garment served as both coat and umbrella, the lanolin naturally present in wool providing some water resistance. Leather shoes might be covered with wooden pattens, a type of overshoe with a raised wooden platform that kept the wearer somewhat above the mud and water. These practical adaptations to wet conditions had evolved over centuries of living in England's damp climate. When the errei door opens for his departure, you get your first clear view of the world outside. The rain falls steadily across a landscape both familiar and utterly foreign. If you're in a village, you might see a cluster of similar dwellings, small thatched houses with smoke rising from their central hearths. Between them run not paved streets, but muddy paths, now slick and puddled with rainwater. Around the village stretch open fields divided into strips, the medieval farming system designed to share both good and poor land among the community. The sound of the rainfall is different outside, louder, more immersive, creating a gentle static that fills the air. There might be other sounds too, livestock in nearby pens, the distant call of someone moving between dwellings, perhaps the louder rushing of a stream or river swollen with rainwater. Medieval villages were typically built near water sources, essential for drinking, cooking, and various crafts. As the man sloshes off through the mud toward wherever the sheep are penned, the woman turns her attention to bread making. First, she needs to check her sourdough starter, the fermented mixture of flour and water that would leaven the bee. Bred in an era before commercial yeast. This starter would be carefully maintained, sometimes for generations, a living heritage passed from mother to daughter. The distinctive sour smell of the fermenting starter adds another layer to the sensory environment of the dwelling. The rain provides a soothing backdrop to these indoor activities, its rhythm somehow making the small, smoky interior feel more secure and protected. There's something timeless about the sound of rainfall on a roof, whether thatch or modern materials, that connects human experiences across centuries. This sound, at least, would be familiar to you, a small comfort in this otherwise alien environment. As the woman works the dough with practiced hands, you might wonder about your place in this medieval household. As a stranger, you'd be something of an anomaly. Travel in medieval times wasn't impossible, but it was difficult, dangerous, and relatively uncommon for ordinary people. Many peasants might live and die without ever venturing more than 20 miles from their birthplace. A stranger suddenly appearing would raise questions, though hospitality to travelers was considered both a social obligation and a Christian virtue. Your clothing, speech, and perhaps even your physical appearance would mark you as foreign, possibly suspiciously so. Medieval communities were often tight-knit and wary of outsiders, particularly in troubled times. Yet there were established roles for travelers, pilgrims, merchants, messengers, or simply people seeking work or new opportunities. You might find yourself needing to adopt one of these recognizable roles to integrate into this new reality. The rain continues its gentle percussion as the day moves forward. You notice the woman sneaking curious glances at you as she works the dough with strong, practiced movements. Finally, she might speak directly to you, perhaps asking where you've come from or where you're headed. The language barrier might make this challenging. Middle English would sound partly familiar, but largely foreign to modern ears, with different pronunciations, vocabulary, and grammatical structures. Communication would require patience and creativity on both sides. As you struggle to find common linguistic ground, the sound of the rainfall intensifies briefly. Water begins to drip more persistently through one section of the thatch, necessitating another bucket to be positioned to catch the leak. This ordinary household crisis provides a moment of shared purpose. You might help move the bucket into place, establishing through helpful action what words cannot yet convey. The woman nods in thanks, then returns to her bread making, shaping the dough into round loaves. Her hands are worn, calloused from years of labor, yet they move with confident skill through this essential task. There's a dignity in this competence, a mastery of the practical arts necessary for survival. Medieval women's work was demanding and diverse. Not only cooking and childcare, but also brewing, dairy work, textile production, gardening, and often field work alongside men during busy seasons. Outside, the rain continues to fall, the sound occasionally punctuated by voices as villagers move between dwellings despite the weather. Life couldn't stop entirely for rain, in a society where daily labor was essential for survival. You might hear the squelching of footsteps in mud, the occasional call between neighbors, perhaps the bleat of sheep or lowing of cattle from nearby enclosures. The soundscape of a medieval village was organic, dominated by human voices, animal sounds, and the elements. Through the open door, you might glimpse other buildings, perhaps the larger, more substantial structure of the village church, its stone construction standing in contrast to the humbler dwellings around it. The church was the center of medieval community life, not just for religious observance, but for social gathering, local governance, and marking significant life events. Its bells structured the day. Its calendar determined when to plant, when to harvest, when to celebrate, and when to fast. As you sit observing the bread-making process, the rain creating a soothing background pattern, you begin to notice other details of the dwelling that might have escaped your initial attention. Hanging from the rafters might be bunches of dried herbs, some for cooking, others for medicinal use. Medieval households relied on herbal remedies for health care, with knowledge of plants and their properties passed through generations, typically from mother to daughter. There might be onions and garlic braided into strings, apples laid out on straw to preserve them, perhaps even hams or bundles of herbs smoking in the rafters above the fire. Food preservation was a constant preoccupation in a world without refrigeration, with techniques like smoking, salting, pickling, and drying used to extend the edible life of precious foodstuffs. The success of these preservation methods could make the difference between sufficient food through winter and spring and the specter of hunger. The sound of the rain is soothing, almost hypnotic in its consistency. It creates a peaceful atmosphere despite the unfamiliarity of your surroundings, a natural white noise that somehow bridges the centuries separating your experience from those of your medieval hosts. As the woman places her shaped loaves near the fire to rise before baking, the door opens again, admitting a gust of damp air, and the man of the house, his cloak darkened with rain. "Sheep are fine," he might report, shaking water from his garments. Miller says the stream's rising, though. Might flood the lower path by nightfall if this keeps up. This casual mention reveals another aspect of medieval life, the community information network. Without formal news sources, information traveled person to person, creating a web of knowledge about local conditions that could be critical for safety and planning. The miller, stationed at the water-powered mill that ground the community's grain, would be well positioned to observe changes in water levels that might affect the entire village. The woman nods at this information, mentally adjusting. Plans, perhaps. "Best finish the bread early, then," she might reply, "in case we need to move things higher." This pragmatic response to potential flooding speaks to the resilience required in medieval life, where natural disasters were faced without modern infrastructure or emergency services. Communities had to be self-reliant, with generations of local knowledge guiding their responses to environmental threats. The rain continues its gentle percussion on the thatch as these practical matters are discussed. Despite the potential danger, there's a calmness to their preparations. Floods, like many other hardships, were simply part of life's expected challenges, met with stoicism rather than panic. As the morning progresses, you become more aware of how differently time moves in this medieval setting. Without clocks, time is marked by the progression of tasks, by the changing light, by the rhythms of hunger and satisfaction, work and rest. The rain adds its own temporal dimension, creating a day that feels somehow suspended, measured by drops rather than minutes. The bread dough rises slowly near the fire, the yeast culture working its transformative magic on the simple mixture of flour and water. When deemed ready by the woman's experienced eye, the loaves will be baked, not in an oven as you might expect, but directly in the hearth, perhaps covered with a pot, or simply nestled among the hot ashes. This ancient cooking method produced dense, crusty bread that was a far cry from modern, fluffy loaves, but provided essential sustenance. As you wait through this process, lulled by the sound of rainfall, you might wonder about the broader world you found yourself in. What century is this? Which monarch sits on England's throne? Is this a time of relative peace or one of the many periods of conflict that punctuated medieval English history? The answers might not be immediately apparent. Ordinary people in medieval villages might have only vague awareness of distant political events, their lives more directly impacted by local authorities like the lord of the manor or church officials. The rain, at least, is constant, a natural phenomenon unchanged by centuries, connecting your experience to theirs across the vast gulf of time. Its gentle sound continues to fill the small dwelling, creating a soundtrack to this medieval day that somehow makes your unexpected journey through time feel less jarring, more grounded in shared human experience. As you listen to its steady rhythm on the thatch above, you wonder what other aspects of medieval life you'll discover as this rainy day unfolds. As the day progresses, the rain's rhythm changes subtly. Sometimes a gentle patter, occasionally intensifying into a heavier downpour before easing again. This natural music has shaped the lives of people in England for centuries, determining when to plant, when to harvest, and how to structure their days. The medieval relationship with rain was complex. necessary for crops yet potentially destructive, welcomed after dry periods yet feared during harvest time. While the bread continues to rise near the hearth, you notice other activities beginning around the dwelling. Perhaps a young girl, a daughter of the household, sits in the corner with a drop spindle, skillfully transforming wool into thread. This essential task was performed almost constantly by women and girls in medieval households, providing the thread that would later be woven into fabric for clothing and household textiles. The motion is hypnotic, the spindle turning, dropping, being wound, dropping again, all while the rain creates its steady accompaniment outside. The girl's fingers move with practiced precision despite her young age. Medieval children learned necessary skills early, becoming productive members of the household economy almost as soon as they were physically capable. By 7 or 8 years old, most children would be contributing significant labor, with girls learning women's crafts and boys beginning to assist with men's work. The modern concept of extended childhood would have seemed like an unaffordable luxury in a world where survival required everyone's contribution. The sound of the spindle's rhythmic turning blends with the rainfall, creating a layered soundscape of domestic industry. You might also hear the man working on some tool or household item, perhaps whittling a replacement handle for a broken implement or mending a piece of harness. Wood, leather, and simple metalwork were often repaired at home rather than replaced. Resources were too valuable to discard anything that could be fixed. As the rain continues its gentle percussion, the air inside the dwelling fills with the aroma of baking bread. The woman has judged the dough sufficiently risen and has placed the loaves in or near the fire for baking. Without temperature controls or timers, she relies on experience and senses, the color of the crust, the hollow sound when tapped, the smell of the fully baked bread. This sensory knowledge, passed down through generations, represents a kind of wisdom largely lost in our world of programmed appliances and digital readouts. The rain intensifies briefly, a shower that drums more insistently on the thatch. Through the doorway, you might see water beginning to pool in the lower areas of the village paths. Medieval settlements were rarely built with drainage systems, meaning that heavy rain could quickly turn packed earth thoroughfares into muddy channels. In some villages, crude stepping stones or raised wooden walkways might provide passage across the worst areas, but often people simply accepted muddy feet as an inevitable consequence of rainy weather. The woman glances toward the door, listening to the heavier rainfall with an expert ear. "Not a flood rain," she might comment, perhaps noticing your concerned expression. "Just spring showers." This casual weather assessment reflects generations of observation. Knowing which rain patterns signaled danger and which were merely inconvenient was crucial knowledge in agricultural communities. The girl with the spindle nods in agreement without pausing her work. She's been taught to read the weather too, another essential skill passed from parent to child. Medieval weather forecasting relied on observation of nature's signs, certain cloud patterns, animal behaviors, even how smoke rose from chimneys or how joints might ache. Without scientific meteorology, people developed remarkable sensitivity to environmental cues that presaged weather changes. As midday approaches, the rain eases somewhat, becoming a gentle drizzle that still discourages outdoor activity, but no longer threatens rising water. The household begins preparations for the midday meal, typically the largest of the day in medieval times. This might consist of bread, perhaps some cheese or preserved meat if the family is relatively prosperous, and a pottage, a thick soup or stew of whatever vegetables were available, often enhanced with herbs for flavor and health benefits. The pottage pot is hung over the fire, and into it go various ingredients, perhaps dried beans soaked overnight, onions, garlic, carrots, or parsnips stored from last harvest, and fresh herbs from a small kitchen garden. Medieval cuisine made the most of limited ingredients, creating nourishing meals from what modern people might consider very basic foodstuffs. Without refrigeration or global supply chains, meals relied on seasonal local produce, preservation techniques, and careful use of every available resource. The rain continues its gentle background music as the midday meal cooks. Through the small windows, the light has a particular quality, a soft, diffused gray that's characteristic of rainy days. This natural lighting would be the only illumination in daytime, supplemented by the fire's glow. Medieval interiors were considerably darker than we're accustomed to, with activities requiring detailed vision, like fine needlework, typically positioned near windows or done outdoors in good weather. As the pottage simmers, filling the dwelling with savory aromas that blend with the earthier scents of damp thatch and wood smoke, you might hear voices outside, other villagers moving about despite the rain, carrying out essential tasks that couldn't wait for clear weather. Medieval communities operated on principles of interdependence and mutual assistance. Neighbors helped each other with harvests, house raising, childcare, and other tasks requiring many hands. The church bells ring again, marking midday, and soon after, other family members might return to the dwelling for the meal. Perhaps older children who've been helping with livestock or craft work elsewhere. The small space becomes more crowded, more animated with conversation, though still peaceful compared to modern environments with their electronic sounds and constant stimulation. Mealtime in medieval households was a communal affair, with family members gathering around the central table or simply finding places to sit throughout the dwelling. There might be a blessing said over the food. Religious observance was woven into daily life much more thoroughly than in most modern Western societies. Every meal, every task, every significant moment had its associated prayers or rituals, connecting ordinary activities to divine purpose. The sound of rain creates a soothing backdrop to this simple meal. Wooden spoons dip into the communal pottage pot. Bread is torn rather than cut. And perhaps there's a shared cup of ale, the common beverage for all ages in a time when water sources could be unsafe. This ale would be weaker than modern beer, brewed at home by the woman of the house as part of her regular duties, and provided both hydration and calories for hardworking bodies. Conversation during the meal might touch on practical matters, tasks to be completed, reports on livestock or crops, plans for upcoming religious festivals or market days. News from beyond the village might be scarce, brought occasionally by travelers or those who had visited nearby markets. The medieval worldview was typically local and immediate, with relatively little awareness of events beyond the region, unless they directly affected daily life. After the meal, work would resume, the endless cycle of tasks required to maintain a medieval household. Perhaps the man might work on repairing a section of fence or a tool, now doing so inside due to the continuing rain. The woman might return to textile work, spinning, weaving, or mending clothes that were far too valuable to discard when damaged. Clothing was a significant investment in medieval times, with each garment representing many hours of labor from raising the sheep for wool to spinning, weaving, dyeing, and sewing the final item. The children would have their assigned tasks as well, all contributing to the household economy according to their abilities. Even toddlers might be given simple sorting tasks or set to watching younger siblings. Medieval childhood was short, with most children taking on adult responsibilities gradually, but early by modern standards. The rain continues its gentle rhythm throughout these afternoon activities, sometimes strengthening briefly, other times fading to a gentle patter, but never quite stopping. The sound has a curiously timeless quality, connecting your experience to countless rainy afternoons throughout human history, when people have gathered inside to work, talk, and simply be together while water falls from the sky outside. As the light begins to fade earlier than usual due to the rain clouds, preparations for the evening meal begin. This would typically be lighter than the midday repast, perhaps bread with cheese, leftover pottage reheated, or some simple porridge. Medieval eating patterns generally followed daylight, with the largest meal at midday when natural light was best for working and earlier bedtimes than modern people typically observe. The rain sounds different as darkness begins to fall, somehow more prominent in the growing darkness, its rhythm more noticeable when visual stimuli diminish. Oil lamps or simple rush lights might be lit. These were made by soaking the pithy center of rushes in animal fat, providing a dim illumination that would have been precious in an age when artificial light was both expensive and dangerous in these flammable dwellings. Evening in a medieval household would bring a gradual winding down of activities. Without bright artificial lighting to extend the day, work requiring good vision would cease, replaced by tasks that could be done by touch or limited light, perhaps whittling, simple mending, or preparing materials for the next day's work. Conversation might turn to storytelling or singing. Oral traditions remained strong in communities where books were rare and literacy limited primarily to the clergy and nobility. The sound of rainfall would again become more prominent as other sounds diminish, its steady rhythm perhaps lulling younger children to sleep in their shared sleeping areas. Medieval sleeping arrangements were communal by modern standards, with family members sharing not just rooms, but often bed platforms, clustering together for warmth and security. As the evening progresses, more household members prepare for sleep. There would be evening prayers, perhaps a recitation of the Pater Noster, Our Father, and Ave Maria, Hail Mary, the most commonly known prayers among ordinary medieval people. Religious observance was woven throughout daily life, providing both structure and meaning in a world that could often seem precarious and uncertain. The rain continues its gentle pattern as the household settles for the night, the fire banked but not extinguished, providing minimal warmth until morning. Darkness would be nearly complete, a level of darkness rarely experienced in our electrified modern world. The subtle sounds of the dwelling would become more apparent. The settling of timbers, the occasional drip from the thatch, the soft breathing of sleepers, all accompanied by the constant gentle percussion of rainfall. As you lie on your straw mattress, listening to these medieval night sounds, the rain creates a soothing blanket of white noise that spans the centuries. Despite the profound differences between this world and the one you've left behind, some experiences remain universal. The comfort of shelter during rain, the quiet intimacy of a household at rest, the gentle drift toward sleep accompanied by the sound of water falling from the sky. And as you begin to drift off, lulled by the rain's ancient rhythm, you might wonder if this journey is just a dream, or if perhaps your modern life was the dream, and this simpler, harder, more immediate existence is the reality to which you've awakened. The raindrops continue their gentle patter on the thatch above, a timeless lullaby that has remained unchanged through centuries of human experience, connecting you to this medieval world in the most fundamental of ways. The last sounds you register before sleep takes you are the gentle breathing of the household at rest and the soft, persistent rhythm of rainfall, a sound that belongs to no particular time or place, but to the shared experience of all humanity throughout our long history on this rain-soaked island called England. The borders between centuries seem to dissolve with each falling drop, and you drift into dreams that might belong to any age of human existence, cradled in the gentle arms of the rain's eternal song. Morning comes slowly, filtering through the small windows in a muted gray light that barely distinguishes itself from the darkness of night. The rain continues. Not the same downpour as yesterday, but a gentler mist that hangs in the air, occasionally gathering enough weight to patter softly on the thatch. This is how many days begin in medieval England, especially during the spring and autumn months, when the boundary between rain and fog often blurs into a persistent dampness that seeps into everything. You stir on your straw mattress, aware of movement around you as the household begins to wake. Medieval people typically rose with the dawn or shortly after, their sleep patterns more closely tied to natural light cycles than our modern schedules. The concept of first sleep and second sleep was common. People would often sleep for several hours after sunset, wake for an hour or two during the night, a time often used for prayer, quiet conversation, or even visiting neighbors. Then, return to sleep until dawn. This biphasic sleep pattern was normal before artificial lighting extended our days. As the family stirs around you, the woman of the house is already building up the fire from the carefully banked embers that were preserved overnight. Fire was precious in medieval households. Starting a new one with flint and steel was labor-intensive, so maintaining a continuous fire was preferable. The smoke rises lazily toward the hole in the thatch, though much of it lingers in the upper part of the room, creating a hazy layer above head height. Medieval people were accustomed to smoky interiors, a small price to pay for warmth and cooking capabilities. The sound of the gentle rain creates a soothing backdrop to these morning activities, a soft white noise that somehow makes the small dwelling feel more secure and enclosed. Through the small window, you can see droplets collecting on the oiled parchment covering, occasionally gathering enough weight to roll down in tiny rivulets. The quality of light is different from yesterday's heavier downpour, softer, more diffuse, casting fewer shadows but still limiting visibility across the village. Good for the barley, the man might comment as he looks outside, referring to the recently planted spring crops. Medieval farmers were intimately connected to weather patterns, understanding how each type of precipitation affected different crops at various growth stages. This gentle, misty rain would indeed be beneficial for young plants, providing moisture without the risk of washing seeds away or damaging tender shoots as a heavier downpour might. Breakfast would again be simple, perhaps leftover bread from yesterday, maybe softened in a thin gruel, or accompanied by a bit of cheese if the household was relatively prosperous. Dairy products were seasonal in medieval times, more plentiful in spring and summer, when animals were producing milk after giving birth. Spring, which you suspect this might be from the references to planting, would be a time when cheese and milk might be available after the scarcity of winter. As the household members eat their simple morning meal, plans for the day would be discussed. With the rain lighter than yesterday, more outdoor work might be possible, though still limited. Fields would be too wet for plowing or planting, but livestock would need tending. Repairs to fences or outbuildings might be undertaken, and perhaps a trip to the nearby mill or to neighboring farms for trading goods or labor. You notice that time is measured differently here. There are no specific hours mentioned. Instead, activities are referenced in relation to daylight. Meals, or church bells. After prime, the first canonical hour, around 6 a.m., before the midday meal, or when the cattle return, might be how activities are scheduled. This organic relationship with time feels foreign to your modern sensibilities, yet somehow more natural, more connected to the actual rhythms of life. The rain continues its gentle patter as household members begin to disperse to their various tasks. The man might don his damp cloak again, dried somewhat near the fire overnight but still retaining moisture, and head out to check livestock or speak with neighbors about communal work that needs doing. Medieval villages operated on systems of shared labor and resources, with field systems, woodlands, and pastures often managed collectively according to ancient customs. You might wonder about your role in this household as a stranger. Medieval hospitality had limits. Travelers would be offered shelter and food, but would be expected to contribute or move on after a short time. Perhaps you could offer to help with household tasks, demonstrating your willingness to be useful despite your strange appearance and manner. The woman seems to sense your uncertainty, and points to a basket of wool that needs carding, the process of combing the fibers to prepare them for spinning. This task requires little specialized knowledge, but contributes meaningfully to the household economy. The continuous production of textiles was essential in a world where all fabric was handmade through a lengthy process beginning with raw fiber and ending, many labor hours later, with finished cloth. As you awkwardly attempt the carding, using the wooden paddles lined with metal teeth to gradually align the tangled wool fibers, the woman works nearby, perhaps kneading dough for the day's bread or mending a torn garment. The sound of the gentle rain continues outside, creating a peaceful atmosphere for these domestic activities. The repetitive motion of the carding paddles adds another layer to the sensory environment, a rhythmic scraping that complements the rainfall's patter. Through the open door, despite the mist, you begin to see more of the village as people move about their essential tasks, regardless of the weather. Medieval communities were remarkably resilient to what modern people would consider adverse conditions. Work continued through rain, cold, and heat, because survival depended on maintaining a constant cycle of productive labor. The village itself would look nothing like modern settlements. Houses similar to the one you're in, small, thatched dwellings made of wattle and daub or rough timber, would be clustered somewhat, haphazardly rather than arranged in neat rows. Between them might run not formal streets, but muddy paths worn by generations of feet, now puddled and slick with the continuing rain. Around the settlements would stretch open fields divided into strips, each family farming scattered strips rather than consolidated plots, a system designed to share good and poor land equally among the community. As the morning progresses, you begin to hear more sounds beyond the rainfall. Voices calling between houses, the bleating of sheep, perhaps the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith at work in a nearby forge. Medieval villages were working environments, filled with the sounds of production: woodworking, metalworking, textile making, food processing. The gentle rain creates a sound background that partially muffles these activities, giving them a dreamlike quality from your perspective inside the dwelling. The woman checks your carding progress, nodding with guarded approval. Her face shows the effects of a life spent working outdoors: weathered skin, lines around her eyes from squinting in both sun and wind, hands roughened by years of labor. Medieval people typically aged faster than modern populations, their bodies showing the cumulative effects of physical work, limited nutrition, and minimal health care. What we might consider middle age, perhaps 40 years, would represent significant longevity in a time when many didn't survive childhood and few lived past 50. As midday approaches, signaled by distant church bells ringing through the misty air, more household members return for the main meal. The rain has maintained its gentle persistence, neither intensifying nor clearing, the kind of weather that could last for days in this climate, creating challenges for agriculture, but also providing the moisture necessary for England's lush vegetation. The midday meal might be similar to yesterday's: bread, pottage, perhaps enhanced with foraged spring greens like nettles or wild garlic, which add both flavor and vital nutrients after the winter months. Medieval diets followed strict seasonal patterns dictated by what was available. Spring was often the leanest time, when winter stores were depleted and new crops not yet ready, a period historically known as the Hungry Gap. During the meal, conversation might turn to the upcoming religious festival, perhaps Easter if it's spring, or one of the many saints' days that punctuated the medieval calendar. Religious observances provided not just spiritual focus, but also welcome breaks from labor and opportunities for community celebration. A village feast, church services with their colorful rituals, perhaps even simple games or dancing would offer respite from the otherwise constant work of survival. These festivals were essential to medieval life. Not frivolous entertainments, but necessary psychological relief valves, moments of joy and community bonding that helped sustain people through difficult times. The anticipation of such celebrations would brighten even rainy days of labor, giving people something to look forward to amid their demanding routines. After the meal, work resumes, with household members returning to their tasks. The rain continues its gentle rhythm, occasionally strengthening briefly before returning to its soft patter. You continue helping with indoor tasks, perhaps graduating from wool carding to assisting with food preparation or mending. Each activity provides insight into the intricate skills required for medieval self-sufficiency. Knowledge accumulated over generations and passed primarily through demonstration and practice rather than written instruction. As the afternoon progresses, you might notice a visitor arriving, perhaps a neighboring woman coming to borrow a specific tool or to share some resource. The exchange would likely involve not just the physical item, but also information, news about other villagers, observations about livestock or crops, perhaps discussions of upcoming work that will require cooperative effort. Medieval communities functioned through these constant small exchanges, creating networks of mutual obligation and support essential for survival. The visitor might look at you curiously, a stranger in this close-knit community where everyone typically knew everyone else, and outsiders were rare. Your host might offer a brief explanation, perhaps casting you as a distant relation or a traveler who provided help in exchange for shelter during the rain. Medieval society had categories for various types of wanderers: pilgrims, journeymen craftspeople, laborers seeking seasonal work, and fitting you into one of these familiar roles would help the community make sense of your presence. The conversation between the women happens in that same partially comprehensible Middle English, with unfamiliar pronunciations and vocabulary that you can only partly follow. Yet the content seems universal: concerns about children, comments on the weather's impact on work, perhaps some good-natured gossip about neighbors. Human social connections transcend time, even when the specific language and cultural references change. Through the open door, you can see the rain has created small rivulets that run between dwellings, following the natural contours of the ground. Medieval villages rarely had intentional drainage systems. Water simply followed gravity, sometimes creating temporary streams through the heart of the settlement. Children might be playing in these impromptu waterways, fashioning simple boats from scraps of wood or leaves and following their progress through the miniature rapids, a timeless form of entertainment requiring no special toys or technology. The afternoon light begins to soften as the day moves toward evening, the misty rain creating a premature dusk that will necessitate an early shift to firelight for indoor tasks. The man returns with news from his conversations with other villagers, perhaps a collective decision about when certain fields will be plowed once the weather clears, or arrangements for repairing a section of the mill damaged by higher water levels. These decisions wouldn't be made by individual choice, but through the complex system of rights and obligations that governed medieval rural life. Fields were typically managed through open field systems where planting, harvesting, and grazing followed collectively determined schedules. Woodlands might have carefully delineated usage rights: who could collect firewood, when trees could be cut, which animals could forage for acorns. Water resources like mills were often managed by the local lord, but served the entire community under specific customs that might have been established for generations. The gentle rain continues as evening approaches, now accompanied by a slight coolness in the air as the day's modest warmth dissipates. The fire is built up again, both for cooking the evening meal and for the warmth that will be increasingly welcome as night falls. Medieval homes had no insulation as we understand it. The thick thatch provided some overhead protection, and walls of wattle and daub offered minimal barrier against cold. But drafts were a constant reality, particularly through doors and unglazed windows. The evening meal preparation begins, perhaps a simpler version of the midday pottage, reheated with the addition of whatever might be available to stretch it. Medieval cooking was remarkably efficient at using every possible food resource. Nothing edible was wasted, and ingenuity in combining limited ingredients was highly valued. Herbs grown in small garden plots provided not just flavor but were believed to have important health benefits according to the medical theories of the time. As the family gathers for this final meal of the day, the rain outside seems to intensify slightly, drumming more insistently on the thatch. Inside, The firelight creates flickering shadows on the walls, the flames, reflecting in the eyes of household members seated around the hearth. This scene, people gathered around fire for warmth, light, and cooking, represents one of the oldest continuous human experiences, largely unchanged for thousands of years before the relatively recent advent of modern technology. Conversation might turn to stories as the meal concludes, perhaps tales of saints appropriate to the approaching festival, or folk stories passed through generations. Medieval oral culture was rich and varied, with stories serving not just as entertainment, but as vehicles for moral instruction, practical wisdom, and cultural continuity. Without television, books, or internet, direct human communication was the primary medium for both information and entertainment. The rain provides a perfect backdrop for storytelling, its gentle percussion creating a natural soundtrack that enhances the intimacy of the gathering. Children listen wide-eyed to tales they've likely heard many times before but still enjoy, perhaps moving closer to adults for both physical and emotional warmth as the stories take frightening or exciting turns. Outside, darkness has fallen completely now. The rain-filled night, revealing nothing beyond the immediate vicinity of the doorway. Medieval darkness was profound. Without streetlights or illuminated buildings, nights were truly dark, especially on rainy evenings when even the moon and stars were obscured by clouds. This darkness shaped human experience in fundamental ways, limiting activity, creating distinct boundaries between day and night that our illuminated modern world has largely erased. As the evening progresses, preparations for sleep begin again. Simple mattresses are arranged, perhaps moved closer to the banked fire on this damp night. Additional layers of clothing might serve as blankets, supplementing the coarse wool coverings that provide primary warmth. Medieval people typically slept in some of the same clothes they wore during the day, perhaps removing outer layers, but maintaining inner ones for warmth. Before sleep, there would again be prayers, the ritual ending to the day that provided both spiritual comfort and a sense of closure. The rain's rhythm seems to complement these quiet devotions, its gentle persistence a reminder of forces larger than human concerns, the natural cycles that have continued, regardless of human activity for countless generations. As household members settle onto their sleeping pallets, the sound of rainfall becomes more prominent in the quieting dwelling. The fire is banked to maintain embers until morning, its diminished light casting faint, wavering shadows on the eye. Walls. Occasionally, the thatch above makes subtle shifting sounds as water finds new pathways through its dense layers, but the skilled thatching ensures that only minimal moisture penetrates to the interior. Lying on your straw mattress, listening to the gradually slowing breathing of the household. As sleep claims them one by one, you have time to reflect on this medieval world you've entered. The profound differences from modern life, the physical labor, the limited resources, the smaller scale of existence focused primarily on immediate community, are obvious. Yet there are surprising similarities too. The human connections, the desire for beauty even in utilitarian objects, the comfort found in shared stories and meals. The rain continues its gentle song throughout the night, sometimes intensifying briefly before returning to a soft patter. This sound, unchanged through centuries, creates a bridge between their experience and yours, a sensory connection that transcends the vast differences in your respective worlds. As you drift toward sleep, lulled by this timeless rhythm, you wonder what tomorrow will bring in this medieval existence, whether the rain will continue, whether you'll remain in this time, and what new insights you might gain into this distant yet somehow familiar way of life. The last thing you register before sleep claims you completely as the sound of rainfall on thatch, a gentle percussion that could belong to any century, any human experience of shelter amid the elements. It speaks to something primal and unchanging in human existence, the universal need for protection from the weather, the comfort of community, and the rhythmic patterns of days that, despite vast technological and social changes, still form the underlying structure of human life across time. As you sleep, the rain falls on, connecting this medieval night with countless others through history. A continuous thread of natural experience woven through the complex tapestry of human existence on this island, shaped by water from both above and around. The rain that falls on the thatch above your sleeping form has fallen on countless generations before, and will continue long after. A reminder of the brief span of individual lives against the vast backdrop of natural and human history. The following day brings subtle changes to the weather pattern. You wake to find the heavy rain has transformed into a fine, misty drizzle, the kind that doesn't quite fall, but rather hangs suspended in the air, coating everything in a sheen of moisture. The English have many names for their various forms of rainfall, distinctions that reflect the central place of weather in their lives. This gentle precipitation might be called mizzle in some regions, neither mist nor drizzle, but something in between. A barely there rainfall that nonetheless soaks everything given enough time. The dwelling feels slightly different this morning, perhaps a bit damper after days of continuous moisture, with a subtle earthy smell rising from the packed dirt floor. Medieval buildings were not sealed environments like modern homes. They breathed with the weather, absorbing humidity, expanding and contracting with temperature changes. The timber frame might creak softly as it responds to the moisture, the wattle and daub walls gradually taking on a darker hue where water has been absorbed. As the household stirs around you, there's a subtle shift in the energy, a determination that suggests they cannot allow a third day to pass wholly at the mercy of the weather. While modern people might consider continuous rain merely an inconvenience, for a medieval farming community, too many days of forced inactivity could have serious consequences for survival. Work must continue despite the conditions, adapting as necessary to the limitations imposed by the damp. Market day, the woman reminds her husband as she builds up the morning fire. This simple statement carries significant weight. Market days were essential economic and social events in medieval life, occurring weekly in larger villages or nearby towns. They provided opportunities not just for buying and selling goods, but for exchanging news, arranging marriages, settling disputes, and maintaining the broader social connections that bound communities together. The man nods, looking out at the mizzle with a calculating eye. Should clear enough by midday, he offers, though whether this is prediction or hope is difficult to discern. Medieval weather forecasting relied on centuries of observation passed through generations. Cloud patterns, wind direction, animal behaviors, even the specific quality of morning dampness might factor into his assessment. Breakfast is again simple. Perhaps the last of yesterday's bread, now slightly stale but still valuable calories, maybe softened in a thin gruel. Nothing is wasted in this economy of scarcity. As the family eats, you notice a more purposeful air to their conversation. Plans being made, tasks assigned, preparations for the market journey discussed with a practiced efficiency that suggests this is a long-established routine. The mizzle continues its gentle presence outside. Visible through the doorway is a grayish veil that softens the outlines of nearby buildings. Water drips steadily from thatch eaves, creating small puddles that reflect the cloudy sky above. The sound is different from previous days. Less percussive, more a constant, gentle background noise like distant whispering. Occasionally, the dreams that visit you in this medieval dwelling are different from those you might experience in your modern life. More vivid somehow, perhaps influenced by the rhythmic sound of rainfall, the unfamiliar sense of wood smoke and thatch, or simply the profound silence beneath these natural sounds, unmarred by the mechanical background noise that permeates even the quietest modern nights. You dream of open fields, beneath gray skies, of ancient forests where droplets gather on leaves before falling to moss-covered ground, of stone circles glistening with rain that might have stood since time immemorial. When consciousness begins to return, it comes gradually, your awareness first registering the sound of the Rainfall, but different now. Lighter, more sporadic, with longer pauses between the gentle patter of drops on thatch. Before you even open your eyes, you sense a change in the quality of light through your eyelids. Brighter, with the distinct golden warmth that suggests sunshine breaking through. Clouds, rather than the diffuse gray of previous days. Opening your eyes confirms this impression. Shafts of morning sunlight pierce through the small windows and open door, creating distinct beams in the lingering smoke from the freshly built morning fire. The rain hasn't stopped entirely. You can still hear occasional drops hitting the thatch, but the continuous downpour of previous days has given way to what might be described as clearing showers. Brief sprinkles interspersed with growing periods of brightness. The household is already active around you, moving with the slightly different energy that accompanies improving weather. There's an air of anticipation, of possibilities opening up after the enforced indoor focus of rainy days. The man of the house stands in the doorway, assessing the sky with an expert eye, noting the direction of breaking clouds, the strength of the emerging breeze, all factors that might determine how quickly the land will dry enough for field work. Market day tomorrow, the woman mentions as she stirs the morning porridge. This casual comment represents something significant. Your first real information about the broader medieval world. Beyond this single dwelling, market days were vital to medieval economic and social life, bringing together people from surrounding villages and farms to trade goods, exchange news, arrange marriages, settle disputes, and maintain the complex web of relationships that defined rural communities. The mention of the market also gives you a clue about time. Medieval markets typically operated on a weekly schedule, each village or town having its designated day. This system allowed merchants to travel a circuit, bringing goods from larger towns to smaller villages and collecting local products for wider distribution. These regular gatherings were essential not just economically, but socially, creating a rhythm of community interaction that helped bind medieval society together. As you eat your morning porridge, perhaps enhanced today with a precious sprinkle of honey, making it noticeably sweeter than previous days' meals, you hear more details about this upcoming market. It seems to be held in a nearby town, requiring a journey of a few hours by foot. The man discusses what they have to trade or sell, perhaps some excess wool from their sheep, a wheel of cheese that's adequately aged, or some handicraft produced during the winter months. You should come, the woman might say to you directly, surprising you with this inclusion. Perhaps your help with household tasks has earned you a measure of trust, or maybe they've simply accepted your presence as one of life's unexplained curiosities. Going to the market would offer you a broader view of medieval life than you've experienced in the confines of this single dwelling and village. A chance to see more of the world you've mysteriously entered. As the morning progresses and chores are completed, the cloud breaks become longer, allowing for extended periods of sunshine that transform the appearance of the landscape visible through the doorway. Puddles gleam like mirrors, reflecting the blue sky now emerging. Droplets on thatch, grass, and tree leaves catch the light, creating countless tiny prisms that momentarily scatter rainbows before falling or evaporating in the growing warmth. With improving weather comes the possibility of more outdoor activities. The man announces he'll check the fields to see if the ground might be dry enough for plowing in another day or so. Medieval agriculture was agriculture. Extremely sensitive to weather conditions. Plowing or planting in mud could damage soil structure and lead to poor yields. Yet delaying too long might mean missing optimal growing periods. These decisions required generations of accumulated knowledge and careful observation. You're invited to accompany him on this assessment walk, perhaps as a courtesy to a guest, or maybe out of curiosity about your reaction to their agricultural practices. Stepping outside, you experience the medieval village in sunshine for the first time. The difference is striking. colors more vibrant, distances clearer. The entire landscape transformed from the muted, close atmosphere of rainy days into a more expansive environment filled with activity. The path beneath your feet is still deeply muddy, sucking at whatever footwear you have with each step. Medieval roads and paths were notorious for their poor condition, particularly after rain. Without gravel or paving in most rural areas, thoroughfares became quagmires that could make travel difficult or impossible, isolating communities during particularly wet periods. The phrase, "as thick as mud," would have carried immediate, practical significance, rather than being merely figurative. As you walk through the village, you notice details obscured by rain on previous days. The dwellings vary more than you initially realized, some similar to your host's home, but others smaller or larger, some showing signs of greater prosperity in the form of larger windows or more substantial construction. Social hierarchy existed even among peasants, with varying levels of land holdings, livestock ownership, and skill specialization, creating economic distinctions within the apparently homogeneous community. People emerge from dwellings to take advantage of the sunshine. Women carrying bundles of washing that desperately needs drying after days of damp. Children running freely after indoor confinement. Men assessing damage to fences or tools that require repair before fieldwork can resume. Everyone acknowledges your host with nods or brief greetings, some eyeing you with undisguised curiosity, but without hostility. The sound of rainfall has been replaced by different auditory experiences. Voices calling between dwellings, the squawk of chickens scratching in muddy yards, the distant lowing of cattle. Human settlements before. Engines were much quieter than modern environments, but still rich with organic sounds. Voices, animals, craft activities, all creating a soundscape that would seem both foreign and strangely soothing to modern ears, accustomed to mechanical background noise. Beyond the cluster of dwellings, the bomb landscape opens into fields divided by hedgerows, the classic medieval open field system where farming occurred in large communal areas rather than individual enclosed farms. These fields would be worked collectively, though divided into strips belonging to different families. The system ensured everyone had some portion of the best land and some of the worst, a practical approach to fairness in an agricultural society. Barley there, your host might indicate, pointing to one section where tiny green shoots are just visible in the dark earth. Wheat beyond. Fallow this year there, yum. Continues, indicating another field where no planting will occur, allowing the soil to recover nutrients. This 3-field rotation system, winter crops, spring crops, and fallow, was the backbone of medieval agriculture, developed over centuries to maintain soil fertility without modern fertilizers. The mud squelches beneath your feet as you walk the field edges, your host carefully assessing soil conditions by occasionally kneeling to test the earth between his fingers. This tactile knowledge, understanding exactly when soil was workable, neither too wet nor too dry, represented crucial expertise passed through generations. No moisture meters or weather forecasts, just experienced hands and eyes reading the land's readiness for cultivation. As you walk, your host points out other features of the landscape. A distant woodlot where villagers have carefully maintained rights to gather specific forest products, a small stream that powers the local mill, paths leading to neighboring settlements that might be an hour or more away by foot. Medieval landscapes were intimately known by those who inhabited them, each feature significant for the resources it provided, or the connections it enabled. Birds are everywhere now that the rain has eased, wheeling overhead, calling from hedgerows, hopping across freshly revealed earthworms in the damp soil. Their variety might surprise you. Medieval England hosted more biodiversity than its modern counterpart, with fewer pollutants, no pesticides, and more varied habitat supporting greater populations of many species now considered rare or endangered. The man pauses occasionally to point out particular plants, some valued for food, others for medicine. Some considered troublesome weeds that would require careful removal to protect crops. Medieval people possessed extensive botanical knowledge, understanding properties and uses of countless plants in their environment. This knowledge was essential for survival. Knowing which plants could heal, which could nourish, which might poison meant the difference between health and sickness, sometimes between life and death. Returning toward the village, you pass the local church, likely the only stone building in the vicinity. Even a small village church would represent the community's greatest investment of resources, built to last generations, while surrounding dwellings might be rebuilt multiple times in the same period. The church tower might house the bells whose ringing structured daily life, their sound carrying across fields to announce times for prayer, alert the community to danger, or celebrate significant events. The churchyard. Surrounding the building would serve as meeting place, community center, and final resting place for villagers. Graves might be marked with wooden crosses or simple stone markers, generations of the same families buried in close proximity, their remains becoming literally part of the land they had worked throughout their lives. Medieval people maintained different relationships with death than many modern societies, more intimate, more accepting of mortality as a constant presence in daily life. Near the church might stand the village cross, a stone monument marking another common gathering, place for announcements, simple market exchanges, or public declarations. Medieval communities were structured around these shared spaces and common resources. The open fields, the church, the mill, the woodland, all managed according to complex customary rites that balanced individual needs against collective welfare. As you complete your circuit of the village and surrounding fields, the clouds have continued to disperse, allowing longer periods of sunshine that begin to dry the surface mud in more exposed areas. The air carries a fresh scent after the rain, a combination of damp, earth, green growth, and the nebulous quality that modern people sometimes call petrichor, but medieval people might simply have recognized as the smell of returning vitality after cleansing rainfall. Back at the dwelling, preparations continue for tomorrow's market day. The woman sorts through potential items for trade, perhaps excess yarn she has spun, carefully hoarded eggs, maybe some preserved food item like cheese or dried herbs that might fetch a good price. Medieval households operated with minimal currency. Most daily needs were met through self-production or direct barter with neighbors. Markets provided rare opportunities to access goods from beyond the immediate community and to convert surplus production into currency needed for rent payments or specialized items that couldn't be produced locally. You're drawn into these preparations, perhaps helping to gather and clean items for trading, or assisting with final tasks that must be completed before a day away from the dwelling. There's an atmosphere of anticipation. Market days combined economic necessity with welcome social opportunity. A chance to see beyond the confines of daily routine and experience the slightly wider world represented by the nearest market town. Evening approaches with the distinctive clarity that often follows rain, sharp-edged golden light that makes even ordinary scenes appear somehow heightened and more vivid. The final meal of the day might be slightly more festive than usual, perhaps including some special item saved for the occasion of improved weather or in anticipation of tomorrow's excursion. As darkness falls, slower now without rain clouds to accelerate nightfall, conversation turns to practical matters concerning the market journey. You learn that they'll depart shortly after dawn, walking several miles along muddy tracks to reach the market town. The journey itself will be part of the market day experience, encountering other villagers on the same path, perhaps joining together in larger groups for both companionship and safety. Even in relatively peaceful times, medieval travelers preferred not to journey alone if it could be avoided. The fire burns more brightly tonight, allowed to consume more precious fuel now that its heat isn't competing with the damp chill of continuous rainfall. Its light plays across the faces of the household, members as they discuss their hopes for trades or purchases at tomorrow's market. Perhaps a new tool component, a different variety of seed, or some small luxury like spices that might arrive via traders from distant towns connected to port cities. When it comes time for sleep, the dwelling feels different, drier, warmer, filled with anticipation rather than the quiet resignation that accompanied rainy confinement. Through the small windows, stars are occasionally visible as remaining clouds continue to disperse, their faint light creating subtle patterns on the earthen floor throughout the night. Your sleep is different too, lighter, filled with dreams of movement, rather than the deep, rain-lulled slumber of previous nights. Perhaps your mind is preparing for tomorrow's journey, your first real opportunity to see more of this medieval world beyond the confines of a single dwelling and village. What will the market town reveal? How will people react to your obviously foreign presence? What new insights will you gain into this society so distant from your own, yet connected through basic human experiences that transcend time? These questions follow you into dreams that blend modern awareness with medieval sensations, dreams of marketplaces where the familiar and unfamiliar merge, where voices speak in half-understood Middle English, where the smell of wood smoke and incense mingles with the earthy scent of rain-washed soil. Throughout the night, occasional raindrops still find their way to the thatch, gentle reminders of the weather pattern that has defined your first days in this ancient world, now giving way to new experiences as the skies clear, and your medieval journey continues beyond the shelter of a simple thatched dwelling into the broader landscape of medieval England. Morning arrives with the distinctive quality of light that suggests true clearing, strong directional sunlight streaming through the small windows and open door, illuminating dancing dust motes in its path. The air inside the dwelling feels different, drier, fresher, with the lingering sense of wood smoke and cooking, rather than the persistent damp that permeated everything during the rainy days. Outside, birds create a dawn chorus more varied and enthusiastic than you've heard since arriving in this medieval world, their songs celebrating the emergence of sunshine and the renewed access to food sources revealed by receding waters. The household is awake and active earlier than previous days, energized by both improved weather and anticipation of the market excursion. The fire burns brightly, cooking a slightly heartier breakfast than usual, perhaps porridge, enhanced with dried fruits saved for special occasions, intended to provide sustained energy for the journey ahead. Medieval travelers understood the importance of proper nourishment before undertaking even relatively short journeys on foot, knowing that opportunities for roadside refreshment would be limited and unpredictable. "Ready yourself," the woman might tell you as she packs a small bundle of trading goods. "Sun's up, but the path won't wait to get muddy." This practical observation reflects medieval awareness that even as conditions improve, timing remains essential. Setting out early means not only more hours of daylight for travel and trading, but also less trampled paths. The earliest travelers after rain would find better footing than those who followed, once human and animal traffic had churned the drying surface back into troublesome mud. As you prepare to depart, you notice household members donning what might be considered their better clothing, not dramatically different from everyday wear, but perhaps less patched, more carefully maintained, or enhanced with small decorative elements like embroidered bands at cuffs or necklines. Market days had social as well as economic importance, and making a respectable appearance mattered both for community standing and for effective trading. Even in modest medieval households, this distinction between everyday and better clothing was maintained when possible. Stepping outside into full morning sunlight, you're struck by how transformed the village appears compared to your rainy day impressions. Colors are vibrant, the green of new growth almost luminous against dark, rain-saturated soil, the varying browns and grays of thatched roofs revealing subtle patterns invisible in flat, rainy light. The blues and Greens of homespun clothing catching sunlight as villagers emerge from dwellings, all preparing for market day in their own ways. The mud remains a significant challenge, particularly on the main paths through the village where days of foot traffic have created slick, churned surfaces that pull at your footwear with each step. Medieval people were well adapted to these conditions, often wearing wooden pattens, overshoes with raised wooden platforms that lifted leather shoes above the worst of the mud. Those who couldn't afford such luxuries might simply go barefoot in warmer seasons, their feet toughened by constant exposure to rough conditions. As your host family finalizes preparations, securing the dwelling, arranging trading goods in bundles that can be carried effectively, perhaps giving final instructions to any household members remaining behind, other villagers begin to congregate at the main path leading toward the market town. Market day created natural traveling parties as safety, sociability, and practical assistance all favored group movement rather than individual journeys. The path leading from the village follows the natural contours of the land rather than cutting straight across it as modern roads might. Medieval routes evolved organically over generations, seeking the most practical passage through the landscape, avoiding boggy areas where possible, following ridgelines where advantageous, connecting settlements by the most efficient routes that balance directness with ease of travel. These ancient ways often followed even older trackways, some dating back to prehistoric times, creating layers of human movement inscribed upon the land. As your group sets out from the village, the morning sun continues to strengthen, beginning to dry the uppermost layer of the muddy path in exposed areas, while shadows remain damp and treacherous. The journey to the market town forms a kind of procession, with villagers joining the growing column of travelers as you pass outlying dwellings and eventually connect with paths from neighboring settlements. This weekly confluence creates a temporary community of travelers, all moving with shared purpose toward the larger social and economic hub that the market town represents. Conversation flows easily among the travelers. Discussions of expected prices for various goods, questions about specific items someone hopes to purchase, gossip about events in neighboring villages, and speculation about which merchants might attend today's market. Medieval social networks were maintained through these regular interactions, with market days serving as crucial information exchanges in an era without mass communication. The path winds through varying landscapes, open fields where you can see for miles across newly planted strips, small woodlands where sunlight filters through emerging spring leaves, occasionally passing isolated farms, or tiny hamlets too small to host their own markets. Birds accompany your journey with constant song, and flowering plants add splashes of color along the path edges. White stitchwort, yellow celandine, purple ground ivy, and early bluebells in shadier spots. Medieval people were intimately familiar with these seasonal progressions, their yearly calendar marked by natural changes as much as by religious observances. As you walk, you begin to notice differences in the people comprising your traveling group. Clothing varies subtly in quality and decoration, indicating different levels of prosperity even within what modern observers might consider a uniformly peasant class. Some carry substantial goods for trading, perhaps a cage with chickens, bundles of crafted items, or sacks of produce, while others bring minimal offerings or simply coins for purchasing necessities. Medieval society had complex internal hierarchies within, each broad social category, with meaningful distinctions, recognized between a prosperous yeoman farmer, a landless laborer, a skilled craftsperson, and those somewhere in between. After perhaps 2 hours of walking, with occasional brief rests for older travelers or those carrying heavier loads, the character of the landscape begins to change. More paths join yours, increasing the flow of people. Signs of human activity intensify. More frequent dwellings, greater areas of cultivated land, perhaps a mill beside a stream with people already queuing to have grain ground into flour. The sounds change too. More voices, a distant church bell larger than your village's. Perhaps even the first faint hints of the market's commotion carrying across the flat landscape. Eventually, the market town itself comes into view. By modern standards, it would barely qualify as a town, perhaps only a few, 100 permanent residents, but in medieval terms, it represents a significant center. The most noticeable feature from a distance is the church, its stone tower rising above surrounding structures, perhaps with a wooden spire added atop the tower. Around this central landmark clusters the town itself, predominantly timber-framed buildings, some with plastered and whitewashed walls that gleam in the morning sun, most with thatched roofs, though a few might boast the luxury and status of ceramic tiles. As you approach, the town's defenses might be visible, perhaps not an imposing stone wall like larger cities might have, but maybe an earthen bank topped with a wooden palisade, or at minimum a ditch marking the boundary between town and countryside. Even smaller market towns often maintained some form of symbolic, if not militarily significant barrier, controlling access through gates that could be closed at night or in times of trouble. Entering through one of these access points, the sensory experience intensifies dramatically. The relatively peaceful sounds of rural travel give way to a cacophony of human activity. Voices calling out wares and prices, the cries of livestock brought for sale, children shouting as they play between stalls, perhaps musicians attempting to earn coins from the crowd. The smells diversify too, cooking food from vendors, the distinctive odors of various animals, perhaps the pungent scents from a tanner or similar malodorous but essential craft typically located downwind at the settlement's edge. The market itself likely occupies the central area near the church, perhaps in a deliberately widened street or dedicated market square. Temporary stalls constructed from wooden frames with cloth coverings create aisles between them, while more substantial structures around the edges might house permanent shops for specialized crafts or higher value goods. The variety of items for sale would impress even a modern observer. Not just agricultural products like grain, cheese, eggs, and vegetables, but crafted goods, representing dozens of specialized skills: pottery, basketwork, ironwork, leather goods, textiles, wooden implements, and more. Your host family moves purposefully toward their regular trading contacts, perhaps a wool merchant who buys their excess yarn and fleeces, or a trader who specializes in exchanging agricultural products between different regions with varying specialties. Medieval markets operated largely on established relationships and reputation, with traders and customers returning to the same contacts week after week, building networks of trust in an era before consumer protections or standardized goods. The market's social dimension is as important as its economic function. People gather in groups to exchange news, arrange marriages between young people from different villages, discuss common problems like unusual weather patterns or livestock diseases, and generally maintain the connections that bound medieval communities together. You might notice local officials moving through the crowd, perhaps the market reeve who ensures fair trading practices, representatives of the local lord collecting taxes or fees, or church officials overseeing activities on what was, ultimately, church land in many cases. As midday approaches, the market reaches its peak of activity. Your host family has completed most of their planned exchanges, selling their excess production, acquiring a few necessities unavailable in the village, perhaps purchasing a small luxury with any surplus. They might suggest visiting an alehouse, a welcome break from the market's intensity, and an opportunity to rest before the return journey. Medieval alehouses were simple establishments, often ordinary dwellings where the householder brewed ale and opened their main room to customers. A wooden bench or two, perhaps a trestle table, and cups of varying quality would constitute the entire setup. No dartboards, no bar counters, no entertainment beyond conversation. Yet these humble spaces provided essential social gathering spots where news was exchanged, relationships cemented, and the hard edges of medieval life temporarily softened by simple conviviality. The ale itself would surprise modern drinkers, weaker than contemporary beer, often still actively fermenting, with varying levels of clarity and a distinctive sour note from wild yeasts, without hops, which weren't widely used in England until later medieval periods. Preservation was limited, meaning ale was a local, fresh product, rather than something transported over distances. Everyone drank it, including children, as it provided both hydration and nutrition in an era of uncertain water quality. As you sit in the dimly lit alehouse, listening to conversations in that still partially comprehensible Middle English, you observe how this gathering resembles and differs from modern social spaces. The social connections feel somehow more essential, more fundamental to survival rather than merely recreational. Information exchanged here might determine which crops to plant, which remedies to try for livestock ailments, or which traveling craftsperson to hire for specific needs. Decisions with direct impact on prosperity or even survival. Eventually, your host signals it's time to depart. The return journey must begin while ample daylight remains. Traveling after dark on medieval roads invited both practical difficulties and potential dangers. The group reassembles somewhat smaller than the morning's company, as some may remain in town longer or have taken different paths to reach the market. The mood is generally satisfied, most having accomplished their necessary business while enjoying the social aspects of market day. The walk home seems shorter somehow, as familiar paths require less careful attention than the outward journey. The late afternoon sun casts longer shadows across the landscape, bathing everything in warm, golden light that enhances the pastoral beauty of medieval rural England. Fields, forests, and meadows appear as they might in a romanticized painting, temporarily obscuring the harsh realities of subsistence farming and precarious survival that underpin this seemingly idyllic scene. Conversation among the returning villagers focuses on market experiences, good bargains secured, interesting news heard, notable encounters. Your host family discusses their trades with satisfaction, perhaps showing you a newly acquired tool or small household item purchased with their market proceeds. These modest acquisitions represented significant investments in medieval terms, each carefully considered for its utility and durability, rather than acquired casually or impulsively. As your group approaches the home village in evening light, smoke rises from dwellings where those who remained behind have already lit evening fires. The church bell might ring for vespers, signaling the day's closure and calling people to evening prayers. Dogs bark, announcing your return. Children run out to meet parents and hear about market experiences, creating a sense of homecoming that transcends historical periods in its emotional resonance. Back at your host's dwelling, the evening meal might be slightly enhanced by some market purchase. Perhaps fresh bread from a town baker, a small portion of salt or spice to improve flavor, or early, seasonal produce not yet available in the village gardens. These small luxuries marked market days as special occasions in the otherwise repetitive cycle of medieval meals. As night falls, and the household settles toward sleep after the day's unusual exertion, you find yourself reflecting on these experiences. The medieval world you've inhabited these past days is simultaneously harsher and more connected than you might have imagined, physically demanding and precarious, yet rich with human relationships and direct connections to natural cycles that modern life often obscures. Lying on your now familiar straw mattress, listening to the quieting sounds of the household around you. You wonder if you'll wake tomorrow in this same medieval dwelling, or if your strange temporal journey might end as unexpectedly as it began. There's a surprising ambivalence in this thought. While you certainly miss modern comforts and medical security, something about this direct, unmediated experience of life has touched something profound within you. The fire's embers cast diminishing light across the dwelling's interior as sleep approaches. Medieval darkness, profound, complete in a way, rarely experienced in the electrically illuminated modern world, begins to envelop everything. The last sounds you register are the soft breathing of sleeping household members, an occasional pop from the settling fire, and distantly, an owl calling from nearby woodlands. As consciousness fades, you find yourself hoping that even if you return to your modern existence, some essence of this experience will remain with you. Some appreciation for the direct connection to natural cycles, the interdependence of community, the satisfaction of tangible work producing visible results, the mindful attention required when each resource is precious rather than abundant. Your last coherent thought before sleep claims you completely is a recognition that despite all the hardships and limitations of medieval life, these people possessed something often elusive in modern existence, an unquestioned sense of belonging and purpose, a clear understanding of their place within community and landscape, an integration of spiritual and physical existence that formed a cohesive whole, rather than compartmentalized aspects of life. And then, sleep, as natural, as profound, as universal as it has been. For humans throughout time, whether on expensive memory foam or simple straw, whether in climate-controlled bedrooms or smoky medieval dwellings, this shared experience of daily surrender to unconsciousness connects you to your medieval hosts as deeply as any waking activity could, a fundamental rhythm of human existence unchanged across centuries. Whether you wake tomorrow in medieval England or in your own time and place, this journey through history has offered insights impossible to gain from books or museums alone. The lived sensory experience of the past, with all its challenges, discomforts, and surprising moments of beauty and connection. This perspective, this brief immersion in another way of being human, may be the most valuable souvenir possible from your unexpected temporal journey. A reminder that while circumstances change dramatically across centuries, the essential experience of being human remains a thread connecting us directly to those who walked these same landscapes hundreds of years before our birth. And with that comforting thought, consciousness fully dissolves into dream, medieval England, and modern awareness, merging into the timeless realm of sleep that has sheltered humans through all ages of our existence. The most basic and profound refuge we share with our ancestors, and will share with generations yet unborn.